Airport lounges are the embodiment of everything wrong with our modern economy. From the shifting dynamics of what it means to be wealthy, to shitflation, financialization, and conspicuous consumption. The exponential proliferation of these little rooms of manufactured superiority are a great way to measure some underappreciated changes in the world over the last 20 years. Now, you might think that the 500% increase in the number of airport lounges over the last 2 decades is little more than yet another sign that rich people are getting even richer, which is not exactly shocking anymore. But actually, it's the exact opposite of that. Airport lounges are not for rich people anymore. It's for people who think this is how rich people travel. In the year 2000, the market for luxury travel was far smaller than it is today. There were less than half as many international tourists globally, even after accounting for the smaller overall global population, and the people who were flying in premium classes were even rarer still. Take the seat map of the world's largest passenger jets as an example. In the year 2000, this was the standard seat configuration that Singapore Airlines used on their Boeing 747 along popular mass-market routes like Changi to LAX. 3/4 of the floor space and over 80% of the passengers were flying in regular economy class. The second-story bubble was reserved for business class passengers paying around $3,000 for a one-way ticket. This was a popular option with corporate travelers who didn't have to pay out of their own pocket, but still had companies willing to cover the cost for them to arrive at their destination refreshed and ready to work. On top of that, at the very tip of the plane, there was an ultra-exclusive first class where tickets typically went for around $6,500. These seats offered lie-flat beds before it became the industry standard in business class, and also typically offered higher-end food and drink to luxury-focused travelers. For the 30 or so passengers in these premium classes, one of the biggest perks of these seats was the lounge access that let them wait for their flight in a separate quiet area with some catered refreshments. Now compare that to today. Singapore Airlines has retired the 747 and instead uses the Airbus A380 as their largest jet in their fleet. So admittedly, it's not a perfect apples-to-apples comparison, but the trend is still pretty clear. Regular economy seating now only makes up around 40% of the floor space and just under 60% of the total passenger count. In its place has been a substantial increase in business class seating, as well as the introduction of a premium economy class, which, when combined, now take up half the space aboard the massive aircraft. However, the other extreme has also shrunk. Even on this larger plane, there are now only 6 first-class seats, half as many as on the 747, but they're each significantly larger and more luxurious than they were 20 years ago. Now, with a cursory glance, this almost seems like the middle class of air travel has expanded at the expense of those at the very top. If this is true, it could help explain some of the trends of airport lounges becoming far more popular, accommodating a larger share of larger planes. Airlines have been proud to talk about this as a growing market opportunity, and for what it's worth, air travel has become far more affordable for the average person. But this is missing the bigger picture. Back in early 2000, a first-class seat wasn't truly the pinnacle of commercial offerings. For ultra-wealthy individuals or high-end business people traveling along high-value international routes, there was the Concorde. Tickets on the most popular route between JFK and Heathrow cost around $12,500 back in 2000. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $24,000 today. This was an extremely high-end service that only appealed to the top 0.1%, for whom the few hours they would save on the crossing was worth more than the 100% premium they would pay over a regular old first-class seat. The market was so limited that it only made sense to run this aircraft along very select routes between the world's financial capitals. This wasn't helped by the fact that the plane couldn't go supersonic over populated areas. Now those planes are no longer flying, but that hasn't really mattered. In 2000, an inflation-adjusted $24,000 plane ticket represented roughly 0.2% of the $14 million net worth you would have needed to be in the top 0.1% of Americans. Today, to be in that same group, you would need a net worth of $55 million, and 0.2% of that is $110,000, which is more than enough to charter a transatlantic-capable private jet to fly exactly the same route. For comparison, that same expenditure would be like the median American spending $530 on a plane ticket. Not nothing, not something that they could do every day, but also not a huge expense in the grand scheme of things. This is also just comparing a single seat to an entire aircraft capable of carrying up to 10 additional passengers in a far higher level of luxury. For wealthy people with a family or small entourage, this pushes the economics even further in favor of flying private. In the early 2000s, long-range private aviation did still exist, but it was a far smaller market than it is today. Services like NetJets and FlexJet have additionally made it far easier for people who can't quite afford to own their own plane outright to still fly private when the need arises. Compared to the Concorde, private aircraft are also still just as time efficient. In the air, they're obviously much slower, but passengers can get to the airport less than 20 minutes before takeoff compared to the minimum 2 hours for commercial flights. 2 hours that would be spent in those airport lounges. So the first problem that these airport cool kids clubs reflect is not that rich people got richer, it's that they got so much richer that they left them behind entirely. But that by itself isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is how everybody else is squeezing in. If you often work on your laptop while you travel, you might think that jumping on the airport's free public Wi-Fi or your airport lounge's premium Wi-Fi would be totally fine. But public Wi-Fi is one of the #1 ways that people get their passwords stolen, because anyone with a bit of AI prompting can figure out how to hack your computer and see what you're doing when you're on an unsecured network. That's why every time I use the internet, I use Surfshark VPN, the sponsor of this video. We've gotten you 4 months extra free if you go to surfshark.com/micro, and trust me, you always want to be on a VPN. A VPN helps protect you online by creating a secure tunnel that prevents hackers from literally watching you entering in your passwords, and it'll hide your IP address and your location too. I even use it when I want to book a flight, because you might not have even known that if you're in England, they charge you more for the same flights. So I use Surfshark to pretend I'm in Spain while booking my flights to Spain. I've got it on my phone, my laptop, and my tablet, so no matter where I am, I'm always protected. And if that all sounds good, you should give it a try. There's no risk because they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Use the code MICRO at checkout or go to surfshark.com/micro to get your 4 months extra on us and be safer on the internet starting right now. Alright, so the very top of the private market has moved out into private aviation, which is why ultra-premium offerings have become rarer but more luxurious. However, on the other end of the market, while the share of the economy seats may have shrunk on planes like this, that doesn't necessarily mean that most people have moved up. They've just moved these economy seats onto a different plane entirely. Budget airlines have been growing almost as quickly in relative terms as the chartered private jet market. To use Singapore Airlines as an example again, they now operate Scoot to capture the growing market of highly budget-conscious travelers. Most other major airlines have similarly also started budget-focused subsidiaries. What this has done is segment the market far more than it's ever been before. In the early days of aviation, classes didn't really exist, just flying at all was only done by the wealthy. 20 years ago, almost everybody was flying in either economy, business, or first class, with big jumps in between each level. But today, there is budget economy, mainline economy, premium economy, business class, regular first class seats, high-end first class seats, and a rapidly growing market of private aviation services. This wasn't some accident. This was airline companies identifying shifting market realities and cashing in on 2 very distinct groups of customers. The first are those that need a way to treat themselves. It's getting much harder for most people in most economies to afford the essential ingredients for normal life: housing, healthcare, and education, starting a family, even saving for retirement. All of these budget items have moved out of reach for most people, so a lot of people are giving up and shifting their spending towards an alternative lifestyle, which takes advantage of the few things that have gotten cheaper. One of those areas is travel. Ironically, this has given a lot of consumers more disposable income to treat themselves to an upgrade anywhere on this spectrum. By offering smaller, incremental steps, it just makes the leap a little easier for these customers to make. One of the most cost-effective ways for companies to let the customers indulge is not even through premium seats, but simply access to a lounge before their flight. The best part is that this upgrade doesn't even need to be offered by the airline themselves. The largest network of lounges belong to third-party companies like American Express and Priority Pass. These companies either sell separate memberships to access lounges across the world, or include it as a perk for having a high-end credit card with a large annual fee. American Express themselves have openly acknowledged that they lose money on their lounges, but they keep them because they are the most effective marketing tool to get people to sign up to a high-end charge card like the American Express Platinum. For the young professionals struggling to get ahead, this is an incredibly compelling marketing pitch because it gives them the image of status they will struggle to find anywhere else. Marketeers have dubbed this affordable affluence. It's no mistake that airports and credit cards are one of the few places where social rank is so clearly designated. The idea of having a first-class grocery store or premium economy social media site sounds very strange, although they are trying. Does it make sense for an average person to spend $895 in annual fees for a service that effectively just lets them take on more debt? Absolutely not. But a huge number of people are still willing to pay it, just so they can get into the special club before they board their Spirit airline flight. 20 years ago, having a credit card made out of metal and access to an airport lounge was a major flex. Today, it's a marketing stunt. However, it's still been so successful that these companies have had to deal with a new problem: overcrowding. There are so many people willing to buy into services like status credit cards that a lot of lounges have had to implement waitlists, enshittifying what was supposed to be a premium service. The American Express lounges have introduced a requirement that people need to spend $75,000 a year on their card before they get complimentary access. And remember, that's on top of a $900 fee they pay no matter what. Now, this seems like a potentially reckless way to get people who are already stretching themselves to go into an irresponsible amount of debt, but this move has also revealed a bigger problem. It showed that there were people holding these high-end charge cards and not spending $75,000 a year on them. Now, I'm not suggesting that anybody should be spending this much, but the only way the membership fees on something like an Amex Platinum makes sense is if it's being used frequently to book high-end hotels, restaurants, flights, and experiences. Now, I know it all sounds a bit silly, but this is a multi-billion-dollar market, now fueled largely by people who just want a taste of what it feels like to be doing well in the one environment where it's still encouraged. Oh, and the points you get from all this? They are worth less and less every year. People like to tell themselves that one day they'll be able to cash in on their reckless spending with a seat upgrade, but since 2020, that's become next to impossible without significant copays and timetable flexibility. That's because it's easier than ever for airlines to sell these premium seats for cash. The second group of people driving demand for premium travel are those on the other end of the spectrum. They may not have had high income, but they've downsized from a house and are spending through a retirement portfolio that's largely been carried by the longest bull run in history. Splurging on a business class seat is a treat that their income wouldn't typically allow, but their lifetime of accumulated wealth can. There were still wealthy retirees 20 years ago, but just not nearly as many as there are today. So yeah, airport lounges are a rapidly deteriorating service that people are willing to make an unreasonable financial decision to get into, ultimately supported by a growing market of people who can't seem to win financially and another group of people who can't seem to lose financially. If that's not everything wrong with the world, then go watch this video next and find out why your internet probably sucks.